Welcome to Storytime. Get ready. Navigate for quick wisdom of countless stories. Let's dive into the world of knowledge together and explore.
Once upon a time, in a cozy little farm nestled between rolling green hills and a sparkling river, there lived a rather peculiar-looking duckling. Now, this wasn't just any ordinary duckling. It was, as everyone in the barnyard loved to point out, an exceptionally ugly one. It all began on a crisp spring morning when Mama Duck's eggs started to hatch. One by one, the little ducklings emerged, each more adorable than the last. Yellow fluff, tiny webbed feet, and those irresistible beady eyes. These ducklings were the very picture of cuteness, except for one. The last egg was a bit larger than the rest, and when it finally cracked open, out tumbled a duckling that was, well, different. Instead of soft yellow fluff, this duckling was covered in scruffy gray feathers. Its neck was oddly long, its beak was too big, and those feet. Oh, those feet! They were about as graceful as a pair of bricks. The barnyard went silent as the animals took in the sight. The chickens, always the gossiping type, clucked and whispered behind their wings. "Have you ever seen anything like that?" one hen murmured to another. "It looks like it was put together by committee." The roosters, ever the charmers, tried to be polite but failed miserably. "Well, it's, unique," one of them said, scratching the ground awkwardly. Mama Duck, bless her heart, tried to put on a brave face. Now, she quacked. "It's what's on the inside that counts." But the other ducklings weren't so kind. From the moment they saw their gray sibling, they began to tease him mercilessly. "Hey, ugly!" one duckling shouted as they waddled toward the pond for their first swim. "Try not to scare away the fish." The ugly duckling hung his head and followed at a distance, his heart heavy with the weight of their cruel words. He wasn't sure why he was so different, but he knew one thing: he didn't belong. As the days passed, the teasing only got worse. The duckling tried his best to fit in, but it was no use. Every time he splashed in the water, his oversized feet sent waves crashing over the others, which only made them laugh harder. "Watch out, tsunami!" they jeered. "Here comes Ugly." Even the older animals joined in. The pigs, who weren't exactly the poster children for good looks themselves, would snort and oink whenever the duckling waddled by. "Hey, Ugly, did you break a mirror today?" one piglet squealed. "Because my luck just took a nosedive." The ugly duckling couldn't take it anymore. One particularly rough day, after being chased away from the feeding trough by a particularly nasty goose, he decided to leave the farm. Surely, somewhere out there, he would find a place where he belonged. So, with a heavy heart and a beak full of determination, the ugly duckling set off into the wide world. As he waddled away, the farm animals barely noticed his departure. They were too busy laughing at the chicken's latest gossip. The ugly duckling wandered through forests and fields, over hills and streams, until he came across a quiet little pond hidden in a grove of trees. Tired and lonely, he decided to settle there for a while. The pond was peaceful, and there were no other ducks to make fun of him. But even in solitude, the ugly duckling couldn't escape his reflection. Every time he looked into the water, he saw the same scruffy gray feathers, the same too big beak, the same awkward body. He sighed and turned away. One day, as the ugly duckling was paddling around the pond, he noticed a group of birds flying overhead. They were unlike any birds he had ever seen. Elegant, graceful, with long necks and white feathers that glistened in the sunlight. They flew in perfect formation, their wings beating in unison, as if they were performing a choreographed dance in the sky. The ugly duckling watched in awe as the birds circled above the pond before landing on the water with barely a ripple. They were swans, the most beautiful creatures the duckling had ever seen. The swans noticed the ugly duckling staring at them and glided over. One of them, a particularly majestic swan with a crown of delicate feathers, tilted its head and spoke in a voice as smooth as silk. "Hello there," the swan said kindly. "What brings you to this pond, little one?" The ugly duckling blushed, or at least he felt like he was blushing, though with all those gray feathers, who could tell? "I am just here because I don't belong anywhere else," he stammered. The swans exchanged glances, and another swan, this one with a softer, motherly air, floated closer. "Why do you say that, dear?" she asked gently. The ugly duckling looked down at his reflection in the water. "Because I'm ugly," he said quietly. "No one wants to be around me because I'm different." The swans looked at each other, and the first swan chuckled, a light, melodious sound that made the duckling's feathers tingle. "Ugly? My dear, you're not ugly at all. You're just not a duck." The ugly duckling blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" The motherly swan smiled warmly. "Come closer, little one. Look into the water again. But this time, look at yourself through our eyes." Hesitantly, the ugly duckling paddled closer to the swans and peered into the pond. For a moment, all he saw was the same scruffy gray duckling. But then, something strange happened. The more he looked, the more the reflection seemed to change. The gray feathers didn't seem so scruffy anymore. In fact, they looked quite sleek. And his neck, was it really that long, or was it elegant? The swans gathered around him, and as their reflections merged with his, the ugly duckling saw something he had never seen before: beauty. He wasn't an ugly duckling at all. He was a young swan, just like them. Tears welled up in his eyes, though he wasn't sure if swans could cry. I'm one of you," he whispered. "Of course you are," the first swan said, beaming. "You've just been swimming in the wrong pond all this time." The ugly duckling, no, the young swan, could hardly believe it. All those years of feeling out of place, of being mocked and ridiculed, all because he had been looking at himself through the wrong lens. The motherly swan nudged him affectionately. "Come with us," she said. "There's a whole world out there, and it's time you saw it for what it really is. A place full of beauty, grace, and swans just like you." And so the young swan spread his wings, wings that felt stronger and more powerful than they ever had before, and took to the sky with his new family. They soared over fields and rivers, through valleys and mountains, and as they flew, the young swan felt something he had never felt before: joy. He wasn't ugly. He was a swan, and he was magnificent. As the flock flew over the very farm where the young swan had been born, he looked down and saw the barnyard animals going about their daily routines. The chickens were clucking and gossiping, the pigs were rolling in the mud, and the other ducks were swimming in the pond. None of them noticed the majestic swan flying overhead. But the young swan noticed them, and for a brief moment, he felt a pang of sadness for his old life. Then he shook his head, literally to get rid of a pesky feather, and smiled. He wasn't sad for himself, but for them. They would never understand what it meant to be truly free, to be truly themselves. With a final glance at the farm, the young swan flapped his wings and rose higher into the sky, where the sun shone brighter and the air was sweeter. He had found his place in the world, and it wasn't on the ground being mocked by those who couldn't see his true beauty. It was up here, among the clouds, with those who understood him, those who were like him. And so, the young swan flew on, his heart full of happiness and his mind free from doubt. He had finally found his home, not in a place, but in himself. And from that day on, whenever anyone mentioned the story of the ugly duckling, he would laugh. A deep, hearty laugh that echoed across the pond and say, "Ugly? I think not." For he had learned the most important lesson of all, that true beauty isn't about fitting in or meeting someone else's standards. It's about embracing who you are, flaws and all, and knowing that you are perfect just the way you are. The end.
Thanks for tuning in. For more enlightening content and a detailed summary, visit www.mybooksummary.com. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. Let's inspire and empower each other. Subscribe to our channel and share our videos with your friends and family.